An event transpired in my life that for a long time I considered impossible to recount to another soul. What I witnessed beyond our worldly existence left me in a state of profound shock. It was not until a full 8 years subsequent to this extraordinary occurrence that I resolved to disclose my experiences. My wife was the first I confided in. To my astonishment, her response was far from skeptical or dismissive. Quite the opposite, she exhibited immense curiosity and posed numerous questions concerning what I had encountered in that realm, inaccessible to the living. This marked the beginning of the narrative of Dr. Nikolai Piro, an emergency physician who, after dedicating many years to intensive care, ironically found himself in a circumstance where medical professionals battled to save his own life. Nikolai Piro mentioned that he had previously disregarded patient accounts of near-death encounters. However, his personal journey into the afterlife compelled a complete reassessment of his established beliefs. This transpired in the summer of 1978, when, at the age of 50, he unexpectedly experienced heart failure while at work. The subsequent events would alter the course of his life in a fundamental way. The most startling aspect for him was the realization that, following the cardiac arrest, he remained conscious of his being, albeit in an entirely different state he had never conceived of before. His final thought before unconsciousness enveloped him was a pang of fear for his young son, wondering how the boy would manage without his father. A brief period of lost awareness followed, but shortly thereafter he awoke once more. His reawakening, however, was entirely unlike anything he had anticipated. Nikolai Piro underwent an incredible experience that starkly conflicted with his atheistic convictions. He had presumed that after the heart attack, he would either regain consciousness in a hospital ward or at the very least within an intensive care unit. Instead, he perceived himself moving through a dim passage. He sensed his velocity was tremendous and accelerating constantly, a sensation that filled him with a mixture of terror and an astonishing sense of liberation. He described it thus: "I was traveling at such a speed that I couldn't discern if anything surrounded me. Through the gloom I burst into a light so brilliant it was initially impossible to gaze upon. Soon, though, it ceased to overwhelm my vision, and I could observe my surroundings. Then I found myself precisely where I had anticipated, in the hospital room. Yet the room was peculiar. Its walls radiated a gentle white luminescence. My sight was altered from how it was in life. Wherever I directed my gaze, I could perceive everything around me, even through solid objects. Simultaneously, however, I could not see my own form and had no notion of my appearance at that moment." Nikolai further recounted that in this state he did not hear human voices but could perceive their thoughts. When he focused on his family and his home, he was instantly transported there. He observed his wife and attempted to convey all that had befallen him. Standing before her, he passionately recounted his experiences, but she remained oblivious to his presence. At one juncture, she even passed directly through him, and it was then he understood that establishing contact with her was impossible. Subsequently, he underwent what he later termed his personal purgatory. He depicted it as follows: "Outside my physical form, I witnessed my entire existence from birth as if it were unspooling before me, but this was a unique viewpoint, the perspective of my conduct towards others. This sentiment of shame was so profound it elicited tears of remorse. Regardless of how I endeavored to rationalize my actions or persuade myself that my deeds were not so grave, nothing availed. One cannot deceive one's own soul. As Nikolai recollected all his regrettable actions and genuinely experienced contrition, a powerful current seemed to seize him, pulling him back into the dark passage with immense velocity. He remained there for a period, noting how his movement progressively decelerated as the light he had previously seen receded further into the distance. Ultimately, he quite literally descended back into his body. Nikolai conceded that re-entry into the physical form was exceptionally disagreeable. He found it cold, viscous, and foreign. Nevertheless, his experience in the hereafter instilled in him the determination to one day share his encounters with others. Nikolai pledged to himself to speak out, to aid others in comprehending that life persists after death, and its nature is contingent upon our conduct in the material world. Nikolai stated, "Having been to the other side, discussions asserting that no one returns from there now irritate me. After all, I myself and numerous others like me are living proof to the contrary. To contend that this is impossible is the pinnacle of foolishness. I would like to pose a question to these individuals. How, in your estimation, should we have returned as automatons? Regrettably, one cannot prove anything to an obstinate mind. The issue lies not in the evidence, but in their reluctance to accept reality. But for those prepared to listen, I will narrate my unique experiences in the other world. A comparable experience was reported by the distinguished physicist Vladimir Efremov, who contributed to Yuri Gagarin's space mission and the design of spacecraft. His standing in scientific circles was beyond reproach. Nonetheless, he risked his professional reputation to speak about his experiences in the afterlife. One day, while at his sister's residence, he suffered a severe coughing episode stemming from his chronic bronchitis. His breathing grew labored, his body weakened, and shortly thereafter he lost consciousness. He experienced a cardiac arrest. At the instant Efremov fought for each breath, he recognized that his life was drawing to a close. But then something extraordinary occurred. He felt a delightful sensation of weightlessness. The most astonishing aspect was that his consciousness remained active, even though his heart had ceased to beat. Vladimir Efremov later likened his state at that time to the carefree abandon of childhood or the sensation of soaring in a dream. Much like many others who have undergone similar events, he found himself, after detaching from his body, within an immense tunnel that guided him toward a brilliant light. He did not sense his physical form but perceived everything transpiring around him. He felt neither fear nor apprehension. The physicist himself described the experience in this manner. Everything in my vicinity appeared novel and exceptionally captivating. My consciousness assimilated everything at once. For me, neither time nor distance existed. The space was akin to a coiled cylinder, suffused with a uniform light that cast no shadows. On the walls of this passage I observed some irregular formations that resembled bas-reliefs. I found it challenging to ascertain which direction was up and which was down, but I mused, if I am capable of thought, then I continue to exist. While journeying through the tunnel, Vladimir became aware of another striking detail. He knew that everything concerning the world he had departed was familiar to him. His mind seemed to have surpassed the confines of all terrestrial knowledge. His memory integrated with the universe's information, appearing limitless and without end. The physicist also observed that the afterlife possesses many more dimensions than the three with which we are acquainted. Vladimir Efremov spoke of this. My engagement with the surroundings became progressively less one-sided. With every thought or query, the answer materialized instantly, as if from thin air. He described how processes in the hereafter do not adhere to a linear sequence, as in our world, but rather unfold concurrently in all directions. All entities there manifested as clusters of information that encompassed many facets of reality. However, the most astounding event transpired later when Efremov, having composed himself, commenced exploring the space he occupied. He perceived something so impactful that it permanently altered his perspective on reality. He recounted the experience as follows. I sensed that someone was directing me, an omnipresent entity without limits. This unseen yet palpable subject did everything to ensure I was not afraid. I comprehended that it was revealing everything to me, from diverse phenomena to their underlying causes and effects. I did not see it, but I felt a spiritual rapport with it. It could have been my celestial guardian, a navigator in the afterlife, or even the divine, or perhaps an emanation thereof. But the paramount understanding I gained was that in that realm we are most certainly awaited and someone cares for us. Yet Efremov's journey was also marked by unsettling moments. He felt as though something was hindering his advance further into the higher domains of the afterlife. He likened this sensation to uprooting a plant from the soil. Eventually, he was virtually drawn back and he re-entered his body. The initial words he uttered upon his return left his sister profoundly shaken. Georgy Rodonaya, a neurologist, shared his remarkable experience during a clinical death that persisted for an unusually extended duration. Several days. This instance is regarded as one of the lengthiest worldwide, and the most incredible aspect is that he returned to life even after having been placed in the morgue. It all commenced in the year 1976 when Georgy was struck by an automobile. He was transported to the emergency department in a critical state, but regrettably the physicians were unable to save him. However, for Rodonaya, death was not a conclusion but the inception of an extraordinary voyage into the afterlife. He described his experiences thus. I witnessed everything that transpired as if from an external vantage point. The singular thought that traversed my mind was, how can I exist if I am no longer here? At that moment, the full gravity of my predicament became apparent. Previously, the physicist Vladimir Efremov, upon returning from the afterlife, had conveyed words to his sister that deeply moved her. There is no cessation. Life exists there too, but it is different from here. In the 7 minutes when his heart had stopped beating on earth, he underwent a profound spiritual odyssey. He came to realize that death is not the terminus but merely a portal to another dimension. Once Efremov had fully recuperated from the experience, he informed his relatives that death no longer instilled fear in him, because he knew that life continues beyond it as well. Truly astonishing events befell Georgy Rodonaya. His soul was ensnared by an unseen current which guided him into a new, somewhat unsettling phase of his afterlife journey. Everything around him abruptly plunged into a dense, pervasive darkness. This state bore a resemblance to a dream, yet he remained entirely conscious. Recalling this moment, Rodoniah said, "Although absolute blackness enveloped me and I still could not perceive my body, there was no pain. But I understood this is still me. I was cognizant of my existence even in this utter darkness that seemed to weigh upon me. I was unprepared for such an occurrence, but I gathered my thoughts and began to ponder, why am I here? What is happening?" These reflections, however, brought no solace. I knew only one thing with certainty. I was still alive, albeit in a different plane of existence. Then, like an abrupt illumination of insight, a thought surfaced in his consciousness. If darkness exists, then light must also exist. The instant he concentrated on this notion, the darkness began to progressively diminish. The gloom yielded to a brilliant white light, which Rodoniah likened to the persistent flash of a camera. In time, he grew accustomed to this dazzling radiance and perceived the warmth and security it exuded. Georgie described his sensations as follows. As my vision adapted to the light, I commenced to survey the surrounding expanse. I noted that it was filled with minuscule particles, molecules, and atoms. At first observation, their motion appeared random. But then I discerned that this apparent randomness possessed an astonishing symmetry. In this order, I sensed something exquisitely beautiful. At that juncture, the all-encompassing form of being materialized before him. He was overcome by its magnificence and felt how his anxiety regarding his fate completely vanished. His apprehensions about the body and the soul's continued existence dissipated, and all constraints in his perception of the afterlife dissolved. Suddenly, another phenomenon manifested. A golden luminescence, akin to a solar disk. It captivated him with its beauty and beckoned him toward it, unveiling before him a new stage of his extraordinary sojourn. The light that permeated Georgie Rodoniah's consciousness became an indivisible aspect of his being. He felt himself merge with this light, and his soul was inundated with waves of indescribable ecstasy. Georgie recognized that everything that had occurred was not fortuitous, but a profound principle imbued with a higher significance and concord. The comprehension of an afterlife dimension imparted a new, more profound meaning to his life. Everything that had previously been inscrutable now became lucid. The evolution of the soul and spiritual advancement genuinely exist, and he grasped their authentic purpose. Before his mind's eye, his entire life unfolded as a singular, all-embracing tableau. Georgie experienced himself as both an observer of and a participant in all his life's events. He compared this vision to a holographic representation, where each instant, from his birth to the tragic event during the resuscitation efforts, was simultaneously visible and in complete detail. He realized that life is boundless and permeates all facets of existence. The forms of being may alter, but the fundamental essence endures. Everything in the cosmos is interconnected and unified. It appeared as though Georgie Rodoniah's passage through the afterlife would culminate at this point. But abruptly, a startling turn of events transpired, one that he later confessed he could not recollect without profound emotional agitation. While his soul was delving into the enigmas of the afterlife, his physical body had already been transported to the mortuary for an autopsy. As the pathologist commenced his work, Making an incision along the chest, Georgie opened his eyes. Initially, the physician presumed it was merely a reflexive action, and closed the deceased man's eyes once more. But Georgie reopened them. Struck by trepidation, the doctor shone a lamp on his face and was astounded to discover that the pupils reacted to the light. He recognized that this was inexplicable yet undeniably real, and immediately had the body rushed back to the resuscitation unit. To everyone present, it seemed like a miraculous occurrence. An excessive amount of time had elapsed since death. And yet the individual who had been pronounced deceased suddenly exhibited signs of life. During the resuscitation, Georgie felt his soul being abruptly and forcefully drawn back into his body, through suffering and obscurity. After some time, he regained consciousness.